What's up, everybody? Donald here. I am disheveled. I did not shower yesterday, but I was up late thinking about that protest that I went to yesterday, and I wish I kind of said something at the city hall meeting now, because I think everybody would have agreed with me that was in the room, and it's a point of view or perspective that I don't think anybody else shared, because nobody was in support of this proposition, and for good reason, about the in Wilkes-Barre $20 and an approval before you can protest. And people disagree with that because you should be able to just run out into the street and say what you want when you want to say it, because everybody has freedom of speech all the time, not just after they get approved. But the truth is that there's been a debate raised in this country about whether or not you do have freedom of speech all the time. I think that a lot of people have been wrong about it. They're saying you can't go and protest the Democratic National Convention unless you are so far away from it, inside of this pen, and they call it the freedom of speech cage because it's surrounded by a fence. And yeah, it makes less work for the police, but it does limit people's freedom of speech. You should be allowed to walk up to the front doors and say, I disagree with your convention, blah, 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 or the Republican convention, either way. However, what happens in the situation that I'm thinking of is people say that they have freedom of speech, but usually what they're doing is actually using their speech to take away somebody else's rights. And you don't have a right that takes away someone else's right. That's not what a right is. A right is something that you should always be allowed to do because it doesn't ruin anybody else's rights. So what speech do people use to ruin somebody else's rights? A good example some people might say is neo-Nazis going to a Holocaust Remembrance Day and screaming, fuck you Jews, or whatever, the whole time. Now, these people have a right to a peaceful assembly to have their Holocaust Remembrance Day. So is it the Nazis' freedom of speech to ruin their freedom of assembly? Let me give you an even more extreme example that has happened in this country as well. In fact, probably happened more than those Nazi things. Look at the situation of a soldier dying in Iraq, and people come to their funeral and scream, God hates fags. Now, the people at the funeral have a right to a peaceful assembly. Because of the nature of a funeral, there has to be dignity and respect and love shown to this person that's being laid to rest. It has to be on this day because somebody died. They're not going to die again. You're not going to have another funeral. You have to do it right the one chance that you get. You have to have a dignified show of respect for this person. So how can you accommodate that with somebody screaming God hates fags because it's their freedom of speech to do so? Well, the truth is it's not their freedom of speech to do that. They can go to that cemetery maybe on another day. If that's the type of people they want to be, you can go on another day and you can have your protest somewhere else, and people don't have to be there. So you don't have to be heard, so you haven't violated anybody's rights. But if you have the right to a peaceful assembly, such as a funeral has to be conducted in a manner where it's dignified. Two people can't have their freedoms on the same day, in the same place, if they violate each other. So think of it as two solid objects. Physics tells us you can't fit two solid objects into the same spot at the same time. It just doesn't work that way. Well, if you're going to use your supposed freedom of speech to ruin somebody's freedom of assembly, you just lost your freedom of speech. So should there be a law on the books that gives Wilkes-Barre the right to say no to your protest? To a very limited extent, I think the answer is yes, because when you go to arrest those people for saying that at a funeral, you have to name a law. You can't just say, I'm arresting you now because we hate what you're doing and we'll figure out why it's illegal later. You have to say, according to proposition whatever, you can't be here and do this today, which is why you either have to leave or you'll be arrested. And if you don't have a proposition, they say, sorry, officer, you can't tell me why I'm not allowed to be here. This is my freedom. I'm doing it. So yeah, there should be situations in which they can say, hey, this is not your freedom of speech. This is not free speech. This is hate speech. This is inciting violence. This is ruining somebody else's rights to freedom of assembly. So you can't do this here right now. You have to do it some other time. Remember, you can't say whatever you want, really. You can't harass people. You can't try to ethnically intimidate people. And in the case of a funeral, you can't ruin the dignity of a funeral if it is somebody's right to have it, because that is how that freedom works. It must have dignity. So, people outright rejected this, and I think they didn't see that there was any good in it at all, because the way it was written, it was extremely awful. But should some law be passed in City Hall saying that they can say no to certain protests? I hate to say yes, because who knows what certain protests they'll choose. But remember, you always have the right to go to City Hall and say, hey, you have to let that protest happen, and I'm here to tell you why. Nobody's going to come to City Hall and say, you have to let me say God hates fags at a soldier's funeral. Nobody's going to say that. It's very blatant taking away of somebody else's assembly rights. Thank you.